Hello, it is late on a Saturday. I just got done clubbing, so I thought I'd record something. So for this is what I wanted to do. Sam Harris has a reading list that's on Goodreads. He has 186 books on there. And I wanted to read these books. So I thought, instead of just doing that by myself and, pontificating in a corner or something like that, I thought, let's tell somebody about it. So, intermittently, mixed in with all the other kinds of podcasts I'm going to be doing, I wanted to talk about each individual book on the list. Now, the way the list's set up on Goodreads, it's by popularity. So, they're going to get progressively more obscure. The first one on the list that I just read is The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. I'm sure many a person has heard of that one. And I read it once before when it first came out. It was originally published in 2006. It's one of the so-called Four Horsemen's religious polemics that came out subsequent to 2001, led to a kind of atheist upheaval through 2011. It makes the case that religion is false philosophically, historically, scientifically. And Dawkins, of course, he's an evolutionary biologist, so he has a particular perspective when it comes to religion, which was pretty much at peak denial at that point. Just say, okay, I'm back. I think the heat just kicked on. It's got a buzz or something. All right. So I wrote down some takeaways from when I was going through the work, and some of them I've got here. So at one point, one thing that I love that I think Dawkins used as kind of the basis for his other book, The Greatest Show on Earth. I think that's the basis for that. It's the final paragraph or quote from The Origin of Species. Quote, "There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." That's a good quote. It's quality stuff. And that's one thing that comes through in Dawkins, is that he is legitimately enamored with science and especially evolutionary biology. It's something of great interest and great import, and it comes through in whenever he talks about it. Additionally, another takeaway, he goes through some scientists that have been kind of appropriated by the religious because they like to use the idea, the metaphor of God for order in the natural world. And Stephen Hawking, the recently late Stephen Hawking, was definitely a proprietor of this. He liked using God in his work. Oh my God. And it came out in that movie, Theory of Everything. I really didn't like that movie. Eddie Redmayne was good. He had a good performance, but my God, it turned an eminent scientist's life into a freaking generic melodrama. And not only that, it didn't look very good. It was just overly saturated. It wasn't framed well. It looked like a soap opera. It was not. I didn't like it. Anyway, so it wasn't even supposed to be about him. But Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein used this metaphor at various times, and it led to some annoying conversations with various theists at various times. So he has some quotes from Einstein. Quote, "It was, of course, a lie when you read about my religious convictions, a lie which is being systematically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this, but have expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world so far as our science can reveal it." End quote. So Albert Einstein said that. Letter to an Atheist, 1954. Quoted in Albert Einstein, The Human Side, edited by Helen Dukas and Banish Hoffman. So if you want to look more into that. And I saw some more quotes in a similar vein, but so from what I can tell, Einstein certainly didn't believe in a personal God, and I think given his general intelligence, that wouldn't be very likely. But so he tries to, Dawkins, that is, tries to remedy that whole issue. He goes into the Supreme Court case, Gonzalez v. Centro, which is about the conflict between what the state criminalizes or the feds criminalize and religious freedoms. So in that case, I can't really remember. A religious organization, the UDV, I think it was in Spanish, the UDV, they were using a controlled substance called Huasca. I think the substance had DMT in it or something like that. But the decision, I read read a good chunk of the decision. I can't remember if I read this in law school, but I read a good chunk of it, because the one I remember is the peyote case. It's certainly the one I remember, and I think it went the other direction, the peyote case. But in this particular case, which is still good law as far as I can tell, 28 of the 550 cases that cited to O Centro urged caution, but the other ones just cited it approvingly, or for various other reasons, but it hadn't been overturned. Nothing questioned it. Some urged caution. That was it. But in the case, they determined that the government didn't have a compelling enough reason to prevent this group from using this controlled substance. They couldn't show that it was sufficiently dangerous to justify the ban against the religious interest. And of course, this is a big question in itself. Is like, to what extent can somebody, even if you want to hold them to only sincere beliefs, how do you tell what a sincere belief is? But to what extent do you allow somebody's religious interests or ideas go against the rule of law? And of course, there's some kind of, if somebody wanted to start sacrificing virgins and mixing them into the mortar for their buildings to make sure they stand or something like that, I'm sure the state would have a compelling reason to prevent that. But it's a balance, and there is some kind of a threshold under which a religious person can get away with something that's a criminal act because they believe they should be doing it, because they believe that their invisible super person told them they ought to be doing it. Curious. There's a little chunk on the Danish cartoons, which is, of course, Hitchens was the most serious and trenchant when it came to the Danish cartoon issue. But there's some stuff on the Danish cartoons here. There's an H.L. Mencken quote, "We must respect the other fellow's religion, but only in the sense and to the extent that we respect his theory that his wife is beautiful and his children smart." End quote. That's a good quote. Dawkins goes through the philosophical arguments for God and, refutes them point by point. From a philosophical standpoint, they're pretty simplistic refutations. The arguments themselves are not compelling or anything like that. They're not even particularly bright. But they're pretty straightforward refutations, and it's not particularly philosophically robust. However, it breaks down each one and what they are, and references this. There's apparently a website where they have 341 proofs for the existence of God, and it's all tongue-in-cheek. It's just ridiculous proofs for God, because it gets to that point where it's just like, what? Like a tree exists, therefore God is like, get over yourself. And at some point, I'm sure I'll run into these because I like going into these in depth philosophically. Obviously, I think that, maybe not obviously, but I'll establish here that I certainly think that any of the arguments for God are vacuous and nonsense. And it's absolutely mind-boggling that anybody over a 75 IQ could buy any of these arguments. That sounded really derogatory, but I didn't mean it to be that derogatory. I think they're just all vacuous. It's demonstrable that they're all vacuous. And people try to, adjust meanings here and there so that they can comfortably hold contradictory propositions in their head without having to worry about it. But religion really is the easiest big question that we have. As far as any big questions, complex issues go, religion's the easiest one to figure out. So hopefully we'll get over this one pretty soon here. Dawkins references the Fatima, Portugal miracle, which is hilarious. It was in 1917, allegedly, where 30 to 40,000 people witnessed the sun zigzagging in the sky and come careening towards Earth. And like I said, apparently there were 30 to 40,000 witnesses. I think some put it up as much as 1 million witnesses. I don't remember how much Dawkins talks about this, but I remember some descriptions where it had rained recently, and then when the sun came careening toward everybody, it just dried everybody instantly. Of course, it would wreak cosmological havoc. It would be the apocalypse. It would be the end of, spoiler alert, melancholia. It would be we would be done and over with if the sun went careening anywhere. We'd be sent off into space or something like that, or just explode, burn up, whatever else. There's no way that nobody else on the planet would have noticed the sun zigzagging all over the place. But there you go. 30 to 40,000. I don't know how many names they got down and how many statements they made with, signed affidavits that said that, yes, I witnessed this and my clothes dried and that was crazy. Freaking nonsense. Certainly beats out the 500 that allegedly saw Jesus resurrected. So there's a reference to Hume on miracles. And I love this because it really establishes what the burden means when you're talking about a proposition, especially a proposition that breaches that threshold into miracle status, saying that no testimony that a miracle occurred is sufficient unless it would take a miracle for the testimony to be false. And of course, any given person or even any given book, 2,000-year-old book that simply attests to it in a not very convincing way, that is not a miraculous testimony. So it's highly unlikely that that's ever going to happen. Dawkins goes into abhorrent biblical stories, like that of the wonderful familial relations of Lot, when he offers his daughters to a mob in Genesis, and then subsequently is raped by them. Yeah, lovely. The Midianites, whom God told to kill, all of them in numbers. And then the patriarch showing his magnanimity in saying that they ought to keep the virgins. I remember during, at the height of the atheism versus theism stuff, some apologist talked about how, Moses says to keep the virgins, but he doesn't say what to do with them. It's probably just, get some coloring labor or something like that out of them. I mean, come on. We'll get into the Bible at some point. Another concept that I found worthwhile was paedomorphosis. He brought this up. This is taking things from childhood into adulthood. And he referenced it in the context of the Binker phenomenon, in that you need that crutch, that childhood crutch, to get through, to find meaning and comforts and happiness in your adult life, that you're pulling things from childhood that were a crutch then and you still need them in adulthood. Then he goes pretty hard into the child abuse angle, that telling children that they'll go to hell if they do X or Y, their friends are going to go to hell if they don't believe the right way, and all that stuff is abusive and ought not be the case. So just some of my general thoughts. I feel like the Four Horsemen, they really accomplished something massive. And this book in particular, it accomplished a lot in that it kind of seems almost mundane. All the things that are in here, the attacks on religion, are so straightforward now and obvious. It's like, yes, of course. And that's because likely they were popularized by these works. The God Delusion isn't as, literary as Hitchens or as biting as Harris. If I were going to rank them, I'd put The End of Faith, then God Is Not Great, then The God Delusion, then Breaking the Spell, which I have not read. But it's kind of not as good a read as those two, unless you're looking specifically for, kind of a scientific bent. Then all the evolutionary biology stuff is fantastic. It's great to hear about that. And like I said, whenever Dawkins talks about it, his exuberance for it comes through. Absolutely. So this is the second time that I've been through it now, and I don't see any particular necessity to read again. I think I'm really looking forward to The Greatest Show on Earth. I would like to read that, because evolutionary biology is fascinating, although, it seems so, there are a lot of kind of superficial understandings of the way that, these things would all interplay when it comes to the group selection versus selfish gene versus individual evolution, all that stuff, that controversy stuff. I don't think things have been properly defined in that context because they're so big and complex. It's really difficult to do that without running into semantic issues. However, yes, I think it's certainly worth a read, and I certainly appreciate it existing and all of the scientific work that Dawkins does, for sure. So that's the book. I would certainly like to hear from anybody who has other or similar, completely diametrically opposed, any kinds of thoughts related to it. I'd sincerely appreciate it. And that'll be it for this one. Thanks.